2023 was the best year of video games ever for me. There were so many good games that came out this year, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'm pretty proud of myself when it comes to my gaming habits in 2023. I played almost every single big release that came out in 2023, and I played a lot of smaller games, AA games, a couple indie games. Usually when the end of the year rolls around and people are talking about their top 10 games, I look at the list and I think to myself, I've only played like 2 of them. But like I said, this year I was able to play a huge selection of the games that came out. And those games I was able to put enough time into where I feel like I can make this list as accurately as I can. So with that being said, I'm going to share with you guys my 10 favorite games of 2023. But before I do that, you should consider subscribing. I talk about video games all the time on this page. I have a lot of day one first impressions reviews, but a lot of other gaming content as well. And I'm going to do a lot more gaming content in 2024 going forward. But I also talk about movies, TV shows, that sort of thing. I do trailer reactions as well. And also, before we get into my list, like I said, I played a lot of games this year, but there were a good handful of games that I couldn't get around to playing that I did miss that aren't going to be included on this list. The biggest one being Baldur's Gate 3. I know a lot of people love that game. I'll probably love that game. I have the physical deluxe edition pre-ordered, but I have not played that game yet, so it's not going to be on this list. Also, Sons of the Forest looks really, really fun. I'm not huge into survival games like that, but if there's any that I think I'm going to love, it's probably Sons of the Forest, but I don't game on a PC, so I'm waiting for it to come to consoles. Before we get into my top 10, I have one honorable mention. It didn't make my top 10 list, but I still want to give it a shout out, and that is Final Fantasy 16. I don't have a lot of history with the Final Fantasy games. The very first one I played was Final Fantasy 15, and then I played about 100 hours of the MMO Final Fantasy 14, and then I played the Final Fantasy 7 remake, which I really, really like. And when I got Final Fantasy 16, about the first 2 hours of it, I thought that it was going to be my favorite Final Fantasy game, no questions asked, and I thought it was going to be a genuine contender for my game of the year. I like the cast of this game a lot. It's probably my favorite main character for any of the Final Fantasy games that I've played. I really, really love the plot. The voice acting is phenomenal, but the more that I played this game, the more that I realized it's not a perfect game. It's not even close to a perfect game, in my opinion. It has a lot of flaws, and each hour that I put into the game, I started to like it less and less and less, but it still does a lot of things great that I want to give it a shout out. Anyway, with that honorable mention out of the way, let's get into my official list. But just keep in mind, this is me ranking them based on my personal preferences. This isn't me being critical. This isn't me being non-biased. This is just me ranking what I love playing. Number 10 on my list is Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora. This game came out really, really late in the year. It came out like halfway through December, and it was already a stacked year. So I have a feeling a lot of people aren't going to give this game the proper time of day. I have a feeling we have a Titanfall 2 situation here. A game that a lot of people are going to overlook, but then return to or look back on or go back and play and realize that it has a lot of worth here. I have a review for this on my channel that you should check out. I think it's far more than just a Far Cry clone. It does a lot of things right, and you can tell that the game was made with a passion for the source material, and I really, really love the Avatar movies. And this game makes you feel like a Na'vi. It makes you feel like you're on Pandora. The game keeps getting better, especially when you unlock the Ikrin and you get to fly around. But it is very weak, in my opinion, in the story department and in the character department, and because of that, it's pretty low on my list, but it's still in my top 10. Number 9 on my list is Diablo 4. I really, really, really want to love a Diablo game. I bought Diablo 3 on the PlayStation 3 back in like 2014 after it had already been out for a couple years. And I didn't really enjoy it, but I didn't really know what sort of game it was. I didn't understand the concept of a game where the whole point of it is replaying through areas and getting better gear and better loot. And then I bought it again on the PlayStation 4 and I wanted to play it with people online, but the game was dead by then. And then I bought it a third time in 2017, I believe, for full price, by the way, on the Nintendo Switch, just so I could play it with an active player base. And I had fun doing that. But in my opinion, Diablo 4 does everything better than what I experienced in Diablo 3. I love the tone of this game more. I love the atmosphere of this game more. I love the art design of this game more. I feel like the RPG elements are a lot deeper. I feel like the story is far better. And I love how this game can kind of be considered like an MMO light. I like that you can see other players in the world all the time, out in the world or in the hub areas. I never want to play a game like this alone. They're incredibly boring. But the fact that there's an active world that you get to see around you as you play it is a huge plus for me. However, I will say that I have to be in a very specific mood to play a game like Diablo. And unfortunately, when the game dropped, even though I did put a good amount of hours into it, my brain just wasn't where it needed to be to fully embrace a game like that. And that mentality that I need hasn't come around since. But when that mood strikes, I'm going to put Diablo 4 back in my PS5, and I'm really going to jump into it more than I already did. And there's a good chance that it's going to rise on this list when that time comes around. Number 8 on my list is Aliens Dark Descent. I also have a dedicated review for this on my channel you should check out, so I'm not going to get too in depth here. But this was my first real-time strategy game that I ever played. I love the Aliens franchise, and this game has a lot of flaws, don't get me wrong. I addressed them in that review, but I just loved it. I loved the world, I loved the characters, I loved the challenge. I just loved playing it. This game made me a fan of RTS games. Number 7 on my list, I don't have a physical copy of, and that pains me to this day because I really loved this game. It was actually my most anticipated game of 2023. I could not wait to play it, and that is Hogwarts Legacy. I have a dedicated first impressions review to this game on my channel also, so check that out, but I'm not a huge fan of the Harry Potter source material. I really am not. I have the books over there. I think maybe you can see them. And I've seen the movies a few times each, and I like them, but by no means do I love this universe. But all of my hype leading up to Hogwarts Legacy was just about me wanting to be embraced in this very cozy, whimsical universe and to just live out the fantasy of being a wizard in this world of Harry Potter. And the game succeeds in that department in a lot of ways. I just loved exploring Hogwarts. I loved exploring Hogsmeade. I loved the characters. I loved the story. And this game was very high on my list for a while, but the more and more good games that came out this year, the lower and lower that it went. But this game really did have a very strong chance of being in my top 5 or even my top 3. But the more and more that you play it, the more that you realize they cut a lot of stuff out, or at least it feels like they did. There really should have been a morality system, and it seems like there was supposed to be, but they cut it out. It really disappoints me that there was no repercussions to you using dark arts and dark magic. There should have been companions, and I feel like there was supposed to be, because very early on in the game, when you start meeting these other students, they say things along the lines of, just let me know if you ever want to go exploring together, but there's never an option to explore with them. So once again, it feels like there was supposed to be a companion system in the game that also got cut out. So it feels like there were elements to this game that, had they been there, Hogwarts Legacy very well could have been a 10 out of 10 game. And hopefully all those things that got cut out, or maybe they never were intended in the first place, but hopefully they're there if this game gets a sequel, and I have a feeling it will. It's like the best-selling game of the year, I think. Number 6 on my list. I really wasn't expecting this game to be as high as it is on my list, but that is The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. I'm gonna give you a little insight into my gaming mentality here to explain to you why I like Tears of the Kingdom so much. But for some reason, I have no idea why, but for some reason when it comes to me, sequels are a very hard sell, especially when they're sequels that are clearly built upon the foundation of the game that came before it. For example, when The Division 1 came out, I loved that game. Obviously that game has a lot of flaws, but I loved The Division, and I put hundreds of hours into it. And then when The Division 2 came out, I acknowledged that that game was better in a lot of ways. Everything about The Division 2 seemed better, but I only put like 10 hours into that game, despite the fact that I loved the first one, because I was just burnt out and the sequel wasn't different enough to bring me back in. And it's not just that way with The Division. A lot of sequels that, again, are clearly built upon their predecessors, it's hard for me to get into them. It's one of the reasons, it's probably the main reason why I love the Resident Evil franchise, because every sequel is entirely different from the one that came before it. But with all of that being said, Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom is a very strange outlier. There's no questions asked that this is basically Breath of the Wild 2. This game is clearly built upon the foundation of Breath of the Wild. And I really enjoyed Breath of the Wild, but I didn't love it as much as what seems to be the vast majority of gamers. So a sequel that is very similar to a game that I liked, didn't love, was gonna be a hard sell for me. So I was so confused when I found myself falling in love with Tears of the Kingdom. I love this game. The story is better, a lot better in my opinion. The world, just exploring the world, seems more fun and interesting. I like that the tone is a little bit darker. I like the side characters a lot more than I did in Breath of the Wild. It was a great year for horror video games this year. Probably the best year in horror gaming in a very, 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 very long time. And these next two games were so difficult to figure out which was going to be number 5 and which was going to be number 4. They were both going back and forth on my list. But as of right now, I decided on this order, and number 5 is the Dead Space remake. This game isn't a shot-for-shot identical remake to the original, but it's about, if I had to guess, 97% identical to that original game. So naturally, when a remake is that similar, I wouldn't put it as high on my list as this is. But despite the fact that I'm a huge Dead Space fan, I consider this to be the first time that I got to truly experience this game fully in the way that it was intended to be experienced. Because I have the original game over there on my PlayStation 3 shelf, but it took me years and years and years to actually beat it. I started it multiple times, and then as a little kid, I got too scared to ever finish it. I have a very long dedicated review to this game on my page you should check out. So again, not going to get too in depth here, but it's a near perfect survival horror game. I love the atmosphere. It's arguably the scariest survival horror game I've ever personally played. I love the characters. The setting of the Ishimura is probably the most scariest setting in any survival horror game to me. And now number 4 on my list is another horror game. A horror game that I have a feeling is most people's favorite horror game of the year, and that is Alan Wake 2. Again, I have a dedicated first impressions review on this page for Alan Wake 2, and there's not much that I can say here that people online haven't already said better than I could say now. A phenomenal, mind-bending story, really, really fun gameplay. And I know that this is a lot of people's game of the year, and I feel like I have a bit more critiques with it than the average person does. For example, I wish there was more enemies in this game. I don't want there to be a lot of enemies. One of my biggest critiques with a lot of survival horror games is you don't get enough downtime. You don't get enough breathing room. They're always throwing enemies at you. So I appreciate that Alan Wake 2 doesn't do that, but at the same time, I wish that it had more enemies than it has in this game. And I also wish that it had better and more boss fights. That's one department where the game is seriously lacking. But with that being said, this game does so much right. Some of the best music I've ever heard in a game ever, some of the best voice acting, some of the coolest side characters, one of the best plots in a video game ever. And there's a chapter when you're playing as Alan. I'm not really going to spoil it here, but it takes place in a hotel. And it's probably my favorite section of a video game all year, and one of the best sections of a horror video game in a long time. Number 3 on my list is another sequel, and not only is it another sequel, but it's another sequel like Tears of the Kingdom that was clearly built upon the foundation of the game that came before it. So it was a very strong year for sequels for me, because again, sequels like this are a hard sell for me to really love. But my number 3 is Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man 1 was my second favorite game of 2018, but I genuinely think I like Spider-Man 2 more. Kraven as a villain is one of the coolest, not just superhero villains in a long time, but one of the coolest, in my opinion, and most memorable video game villains in a long time. He might be, let me think. Actually, no, he is my favorite video game villain of the entire year. I love that the tone of this game is darker. I think that the side quests and the side objectives and the side activities in this game are a lot more fun than in the first game. This game doesn't feel nearly as repetitive as the first one. But with that being said, the more time that passes since I have beaten Spider-Man 2, the more that I realize this game does have a good handful of flaws. And there's a lot of things that I think that the first game does better, actually. But again, I think Spider-Man 2 does do a lot more better than the first game did. So it's hard for me to really pick which one I like more. Again, I think I like Spider-Man 2 more, but they're very equal in my mind. I love the combat. I love the symbiote suit. I love playing as Miles. I really love the dark, disturbing storyline with Peter in this game. I know I mentioned Kraven, but Venom, in my opinion, was also a really cool villain. But with that being said, I know that like Diablo 4, for example, has the chance of rising on my list. Full disclosure, I think Spider-Man 2 has the chance to actually go down a couple slots on my list the more time that passes. Is it ever going to drop off of my top 10 list? No, no way. I love this game too much for that to ever happen. And honestly, the lowest that it would probably drop on this list is maybe a spot or two. I can see myself come the end of the day finding out that I do actually like Dead Space and Alan Wake 2 more than this game, but it would never drop lower than that. We're now at my top 2 favorite games of 2023, and it was so hard for me to decide which one of these I liked more. And genuinely, and I hate being the type of person to say this, but they're kind of tied. You can genuinely really swap these games. I like them both for very different reasons. But I decided to give the number 1 spot to the game that I did for a specific reason that I'll talk about when I talk about that game. But number 2 on my list is the Resident Evil 4 remake. If you don't know this about me, I am an absolute die-hard fanboy of the Resident Evil franchise. It is, no questions asked, my favorite video game franchise of all time. I actually have a dedicated playlist on this channel to just Resident Evil content that you should check out. And Resident Evil 4, the original, is my favorite game in that franchise. And the Resident Evil 4 remake continues Capcom's trend of just creating practically perfect remakes that are incredibly faithful to the originals, but at the same time incredibly fresh and incredibly original and worth existing in their own right. Do I like this game better than the original Resident Evil 4? I'm not gonna say that. Ask me in 20 years from now, and maybe I'll say this game is better. But what I will say, and this is saying a lot from someone who considers Resident Evil 4 to arguably be their favorite game of all time, is that this game does do some things better than the original, no questions asked. A more interesting character arc for not only Leon, but all the supporting characters. They made Ashley really likable. Luis was one of my favorite supporting characters of the franchise in the original, but him in the remake is definitively my favorite supporting character. Great boss fights, great combat. The game constantly changes itself up. And yes, I know it's a remake, and a lot of people don't like counting remakes in lists of games of the year. And I understand why, honestly, I do, especially for games that are shot-for-shot identical remakes. But Resident Evil 4 Remake has enough original DNA in its veins to warrant being considered its own game in its own right, in my opinion. And like I've said so many times in this video already, I have a dedicated review to this on the channel you should check out. Not just one, but two. I have a lot of content around this game. I have a unboxing for the collector's edition you should check out. Resident Evil 4, at the end of the day, is probably going to be the game from this year that I play most in the following years to come. For the rest of my life, all games that came out this year, the one that I'm probably going to replay the most and enjoy the most is probably Resident Evil 4. And that's why I'm saying it could very well be swapped with my number 1 spot. But when it comes to me choosing my personal favorite game of the year, I like to choose an original game. I like to choose a game that is going to, for me, represent the year of 2023 in video games when I look back on it. Like, obviously, Resident Evil 4 Remake came out in 2023. I played it in 2023. It's a 2023 game. No questions asked. But when I think about this game at the end of the day, I'm first and foremost going to think about it as a remake for a game that came out in 2005 that I've already loved for over a decade. So I wanted to choose the game that came out this year that is going to be remembered fully as a 2023 game. And that's why I chose, and I have a feeling I'm going to get a lot of flack for this. You can roast me in the comments if you want, because I know a lot of people didn't really enjoy this game, but I loved it. And that is Starfield. Now, before I explain to you why I loved Starfield so much, let me tell you that I'm not a huge Bethesda games player. Here's my history of Bethesda games right here. I'm going to tell you all my history with Bethesda games. Fallout 3, I played in 2013, I believe, and I played it for about 15 hours, and I really, really enjoyed it. Looking back on it, though, I wasn't playing it correctly. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how to cure myself of radiation poisoning. I didn't know that you equipped, gear that had better stats. I just wore the clothes that looked the coolest, and I think I used the BB gun for the first 10 hours of the game. And then when Fallout 4 came out in 2015, I put a good 40 hours into that game, but I didn't love it, and that's it. That's where my history with Bethesda games ends. I've never played Oblivion, I've never played Skyrim, I've never played Fallout 76. And I know when people compare Starfield to a lot of other Bethesda games, they have a lot of critiques with this game, a lot of faults with this game, and I'm not gonna disregard any of that. A lot of people have a lot of genuine complaints with Starfield, and I get it 100%. It's far from a perfect game. A lot of things should be better in Starfield. The map system should be far more interesting. The worlds, when it comes to open world exploration, should be far more fun to explore. I understand all of that. But at the end of the day, none of that mattered to me because Starfield was my first time, what I consider to be my first time fully embracing and being lost into a Bethesda RPG. I went all in with role playing. I went all in with side quests. I went all in with the lore and trying to learn everything that I could about the characters and those around me. I loved playing this game. I found the side quests to be more fun than a lot of open world games I played in a long time. I found the main story quests to be more interesting than a lot of open world games I played in a very long time. And for the way that I play Starfield, it feels huge. I'm the type of person, as of right now, as of the amount of hours that I have put into it, I'm going from story mission to story mission to side quest to side quest to story mission to story mission. I'm not really doing a lot of open world exploration. I'm not really choosing to find a planet, land on it, and then explore it and hoping I find something cool. I'm sure if I did that, I'd start to see a lot of flaws with the game, but that's not how I'm playing it at the moment, and that's why I think I'm able to overlook a lot of flaws that a lot of people have with it. Starfield is the game in 2023 that I'm going to look back at more fondly than the others. I'm going to look at my time spent playing it and realize that's when I had the most fun playing a game all year. And out of all the games that I just showed you, it's the game that I'm the most excited to put back into my console and play some more. Well, there you have it. That's my list. That's my 10 personal favorite games of 2023. What did you think about my list? Let me know in the comments. Roast me for Starfield if you want. But more importantly, I want to know the games that you enjoyed the most in 2023 because I'm curious. I played a lot of games this year, but there were a lot that I missed, so maybe you'll recommend me something that could end up being one of my favorite games ever. Once again, consider subscribing, and thank you for watching, especially if you watched this far.